Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. My name is Dorgan Keeney. I'm the assistant librarian here at Johnson Public Library, and I'm very happy to, along with the Conservation Commission, to welcome Eric Nuse, retired game warden, who's going to present on wildlife tracking and identification. Just want you to know that that this is going to be recorded and archived at Green Mountain Public Access Television, and they archive them on YouTube. So, and then within a couple of weeks, they send me a link, which I will post on Front Porch Forum or write to me, and I'll send it to you when I get it. Weather permitting and snow, if we have snow, Eric has generously offered to do an in-person walk next Saturday, starting at 10. And if you have not pre-registered, please send to the library your contact information so we can inform you about the walk, where, when, if it's going to happen. You can either write your questions in the chat as we go along or unmute and ask them to Eric. But otherwise, please keep your computers muted if you would. And with that, I'll turn it over to Eric. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you. This gave me an excuse to put together all these pictures I keep taking and have scattered all over the countryside. Someday I got to learn how to organize my photos so I can actually find stuff a little bit quicker. But the downside of digital photos is you get a gazillion of the darn things compared to the old days. But I put together some representative pictures of sign and scat and just other hints of what kind of critters you might have in your woods or where you're walking. And the emphasis is really on this, what I put together. It's not so much real technical identification of individual tracks, because there's lots of really good manuals out there that can give you that information. But it's more sort of the holistic looking at nature like you're a detective and trying to figure out not only what the animal is, but what it's doing, and kind of a little bit more life story on it. So that's going to be what I'm going to try to do the emphasis on. So I'm going to go to screen sharing, and hopefully we can get this to work fine. So when you see something like this in the woods, you say, oh, bark's gone from that tree, it must be dead. What's important in reading sign and understand what's going on in the woods is to know where you are and what kind of habitat you're in, what kind of animals might live there, and just really kind of take a look. So in this picture, you look at that where the bark's gone, and you say, well, what scraped it there? And you can see sort of almost tooth marks. And that gives you a hint that some animal chewed that bark off, probably for food. And you might have tracks on the ground, but probably you're not. But you get an idea, this has got to be an animal that can climb a tree, and it's got nice incisor teeth to be able to scrape off the bark. So in this case, probably all of you know that would be a porcupine would do that. A little bit of nomenclature, just so we're talking the same language as I go through. When you're looking at individual prints, when you have a manual that you're looking at, they're going to give you some dimensions, and they're sort of the average. So tracks can be smaller or larger, but like on that left-hand front paw print, the track length in most manuals runs from the back of the heel to the front of the first pad. Some will measure up to the end of the claw mark. So you've got to kind of pay attention to which manual you're using, which one what nomenclature they're doing. And then the width is going to be from the outside of the left-hand toe pad to the right-hand toe pad. So that's on the individual tracks. Now, I'm not going to focus so much on individual tracks. What I'm more interested in is this stride length and the trail width. And this is with the moving animal. So you were looking at the front and rear foot And in this manual that I took this picture from, the dark circle is a front foot and the back foot is the gray. And then in the right-hand track, it's an overstep. So the back foot is stepping on top, almost directly on top of the front foot as it moves along. This would be a typical type of a trail you'd see from a fox or a coyote walking. The wider one here would be more of a cat type of a track. But you measure the length of the stride from the tip of the toe of the back foot, and then all the way up to the fourth foot on it. So that would be the stride length. Sometimes that's hard to tell, but the trail width is from the outside of the paw to the left paw to the outside on the right paw. So that's just a little background info. So I'm going to go through kind of by groups of animals, and if you have questions, feel free to chime in. I'd be glad to answer them. I'm probably going to go fairly fast. I've got a fair number of slides, and I'd like to answer questions that you guys are interested in more than what I think you might be interested in. Game cameras are kind of fun because you get to see critters that are at night and you don't normally get to see. And we don't think of a lot of bear down close to where our houses are. Dorgan was saying the bears don't seem to come close to her place, but we haven't even come through where I live up here on Maple Hill. This happened to be just over the town line in Hyde Park this year, early in the season. But bears, of course, they hibernate in the winter, so we're not going to see a lot of tracks in the winter and snow. You will occasionally, but you'll see sign of where they've been year round. And one place that you'll see, and you know you've got a bear population, is in beech trees. And this is scars that are made on the bark of the tree by the claws of bear. And I watched a bear one year up a beech tree feeding on beech nuts. And it wasn't a large bear. It was probably a regular sized female, 135 pounds or so. And I wondered if it made scars in that beech tree. So the next day I came back to the same tree and I looked the tree over. I watched it at dusk and left in the dark, but I came over and I looked, and all I could see was little pinpricks of where the scar marks might be. I came back a year later. I carved a big circle around it with my knife, and I couldn't even see the pinpricks. So I've come to the conclusion that most of the scar marks we see on beech trees are fairly heavy bear that have actually dug in their claws because of their weight and scraped it. So a fair number of trees, I think, it climbed, and you don't even see where they climbed it. Beech are really important food for bear because they've got a lot of protein and fat, and bear, of course, need to really fatten up for the winter. Another sign of bear is they mark their territories, particularly the males, by clawing trees, and in this case, biting on a sign up in Katahdin Woods and Waters area up in Maine near Katahdin. Out west, they have an awful time with them chewing up their Forest Service signs. So they put nails in them and wire all over them and have a heck of a time with them. But this would be bear. And here's the other sign you will see. This is up on our Gomo Forest, just above Dorgan's place. And here's one of our apple trees that we've done release work on. And you can see the broken ends of these branches down low and up high. And that's from bear climbing the tree when the apples haven't fallen yet. And they just can't wait to eat those apples. And they climb up and they'll break those branches off to get the apples or break them down. You can also look in on the main part of the tree, and you'll see the scrape marks of their claws where they've climbed that tree. This is all pretty fresh work. It was probably a month before, maybe, from when I took this picture. And they can actually break trees down so much and so often that they'll kill the tree. They really love them. They get in there, and that where the town forest is really a great wildlife connector area, and it's got a lot of our bigger species of animals. The other sign of bear you're going to see is droppings. And I used to think, and a lot of hunters would tell me that they found where bear had been in apples and they'd been throwing up under the apple trees, because there was these big chunks of apples. Didn't look quite like it was just a pile. You could actually slip on them when you're walking underneath those trees. And I always thought, I said, that's really weird. Why would an animal take the energy and time to chew on something and then throw it up? And it turns out that bears process food through their gut so fast that you'll get chunks of apple and other matter that'll come through. It looks like it's totally untouched. But apparently they can suck enough nitrogen or nutrients out of it that it makes it worth doing it. And they just are eating machines in the fall, no question. So you'll get droppings. This is sort of human size, and a big bear would even be more. And lots of times there's no shape to it at all. Just great big thing. And here's a bear track from last spring, and this also was just over the town line here in Hyde Park. And a bear that had come out of hibernation and was looking around for some winter kill or something to eat, I guess. Usually when I take my pictures, I rarely have a measuring tape with me, which I ought to do, but I always have a pocket knife and a lighter in my pocket. And that lighter is about 4 inches long, and my pocket knife is slightly longer. So that's just for reference when we're looking at them. You can see the toes of that bear is down at the bottom. So it's walking towards us in this case. And this would be the hind foot, because bears, their front foot looks is much shorter, not nearly so long with the pad that registers. And for the back foot really looks a lot like us. Now, the other critter that we have common around here that has a really big foot is the snowshoe hare. Of course, they're clearly not anywhere near as big as a bear, but they have a big foot. And that's where the snowshoe comes from, because that floats them up on top. And snowshoe hare and any of the rabbits hop generally. They don't walk. Every once in a while, you'll see where one walks and it'll really throw you, but they almost always hop. And the way they move is they'll put their front feet down and then they swing. They kind of jump and they swing their rear feet in front of their front feet. So this animal is moving towards us down the screen is where this is coming from. And so these would be the front feet on top here, and then the big hind feet down below. Show a little more. Here's a close-up, and you can see how big those hind feet are. When you just see an individual track of that hind foot, you can really just sort of shake your head, maybe out on a snow machine trail or something like that. You say, what the heck is that? But when you have all four prints together, it's really clear what you've got. They're also not real distinct because they have a lot of hair between their toes. So that gives it this sort of padded look to them. Another sign of snowshoe is what they eat. They love hardwood whips. And unfortunately, this isn't a real good focus, but you see this stick right in the front. You can see this real sharp angle right here. Snowshoe hare have really sharp incisor teeth, both top and bottom. And they'll cut off these hardwood pieces just like you would with shears. So it's a real clean cut, and that's their main feed. Here's where one sat in the snow, was probably feeding, and then defecated. So he's got a couple droppings there. There's the close up. You can see it looks like it's made of woody material, and it is. And it's exactly the shape of regular M&Ms. They don't taste quite as good, but they look just the same. Anyway, other hoppers that we have that are real common are our squirrels that we have around here. So we have gray squirrels, which are becoming more common, I think, as we get more warming and more oak trees and bird feeders. I've got 4 coming to my bird feeder right at the moment. And red squirrels, smaller cousin. And then one we don't see so often, but we do have a fair population of, is the flying squirrel. And this is one that my game camera got a picture of. You can see its really big eye here shining in the infrared. We won't see their tracks on the ground very often. It's only because they'll glide from tree to tree. But if they don't quite make it, sometimes you'll see a running squirrel track and you wonder how the heck did it get there? It looked like it dropped out of the sky. Well, it did. That's how they got there. And they're very nocturnal. We rarely see them in the daytime. important with a lot of critters, as I mentioned, to know where you are and what might be there. So red squirrel and gray squirrel tracks look pretty similar. They're a little different in size. They're easy enough to tell when they're close together, but when it's separate, it's not quite so easy. But if you're in a softwood area, hemlock, spruce, white pine, and you see a pile of the chewed up pine cones, you know you've got red squirrel, because that's what they eat. They'll also eat, acorns and beech nuts and things like that too, but they're primarily cone eaters, where gray squirrels don't eat cones, or at least really rarely. Here's tracks close up, a little bit of soft or new snow on top of crust. And again, the hind feet are in front when they're hopping, and the front feet behind. You can see 5 toes registered here along with the pad. The back foot, lots of times, even though they do have 5 toes, lots of times you only see 4 on squirrels in the back if you get a good clear print like this. Here's red squirrel on the top and gray squirrel on the bottom. So you get an idea of the difference in size. The foot is quite a lot bigger. The overall group size is pretty similar, but definitely bigger for the gray squirrel. So the red squirrel is going to the right and the gray squirrel is coming towards us. Now, another one that can kind of fool you is when you get a running squirrel when it's really running. And I took this picture this morning, actually, in the new snow we had. And I had this red squirrel really flying across in front of me. And I was surprised to see how far it jumped. That ski pole is about a little over 3 feet long, more like 4 feet. And that squirrel had a good yard jump. Normally, if I saw a track like this, just out of the blue, my first impression would be that it would be an ermine, because it's small, it's narrow, it's got a double print, appears to be a double print, and a long jump between the track groups. But when you look at it closer, the individual track, you can see, although it's not distinct because it's really soft snow, but here's the rear feet, and then tucked almost overlapping with them are the front feet. And with an ermine, you wouldn't see that. They would be they'd be right on top of each other, and they wouldn't be so square. When we look at the weasel family, you'll see that the tracks offset more than the rabbits or squirrels do, but pretty similar in size. And here's a really little track, and I should have more of these, but this is just a little deer mouse. And interesting thing with deer mice is they drag their tail. So you can see a little tail drag between the 2 tracks. They're also scraping his feet. And they're doing a direct register where their back feet is landing right where their front feet are. So it looks like they're hopping on their back feet, but they're not. That's the way they move along. These animals spend most of their time under the snow. It's pretty dangerous for them to be on top of the snow. All kinds of predators out there looking to eat them. Now, we've got some critters that migrate, and so we're not going to see a lot of their tracks in the snow, but I wanted an excuse to show a few of my pictures, so I threw them in here. But here's some goose tracks, and you can see they've got a webbed foot. They're only registering 3 toes, and they're very pigeon-toed, or in this case, goose-toed, and walking away from us right there. The only track that you might confuse a little bit with that would be turkey, but we'll see turkey tracks and it's not too close. Other bird we have around here, pretty common, is ruffed grouse. And this is a female grouse. And this is my one that comes to my feeder. He comes in about twice a day, much to the enjoyment of my Brittany. Likes to see him come in. But I get to see lots of his tracks. I just threw this in. This was one that committed suicide up at Doug Moldy's place this fall, ran into a picture window up there. And I opened the crop up. I wanted to see what he'd been eating. And which also, if you know what the animals eat, you know what kind of animals to expect when you're seeing that kind of food source. And this is pretty typical for late fall. Catkins, probably from birch trees. Also the little terminal buds, probably birch also, although they love aspen, and little bits of fern. That's what this guy had in him. The other day I was snowshoeing and I spotted these droppings and I said, what the heck, you know, they're all scattered along. And then I looked up and I could see that there was a roost tree right above it. And we didn't have enough snow for the grouse to roost under the snow. So they were up in trees is where they would spend the night. So I had these little droppings on the ground. These happen to be ptarmigan droppings from up near Ungava Bay, but other more woody material in them than our grouse. They look very similar. And quite often, this is what you'll find. You'll find a pile of these droppings together. And that's where the animals stood there, probably roosted overnight, or maybe even a couple times at the same place, and had a lot of small droppings. Those are about a ½ inch long, probably, something like that. The neat thing with birds is you can see where they fly with their wing imprints. So you can see the outer wing imprint here to the right and to the left, and a little bit of a hole here where he tried to push off with his feet. You can't see it real clear, but at the very bottom here, you can start to see the triangle shape with the feet. It's pretty hard to see right here. I've got some other pictures that'll show it clearer. And this one was kind of interesting, and I actually found this first. This is where the grouse flew down and landed. So it kind of slipped into the snow right here, and then its whole body made an impression, and then it walked off from there. Grouse like to walk. Turkeys, all those animals, takes a lot less energy if they walk. If they get real deep snow, they can't do it. Here's where a grouse settled down for a little while, and there's a couple droppings. Quite characteristic to have this little bit of white on the edge of it as it dries. And there you can see a bit of a track. A little hard to tell exactly what's going on there by just looking at that, but I had the advantage of seeing the actual track. This is kind of what will alert you to a grouse the quickest, other than of course one flying, is to see its tracks walking. And you can see the hind foot points ahead, and that front toe is definitely pointing the direction that it goes. In deep snow, it's kind of hard to tell, but they don't walk that much in deep snow. But this grouse walked down from the top of the picture, probably picked some buds off this bit of branch, and then walked towards where I'm standing there. The other critter we got plenty of around here, of course, is wild turkey. Male on the right, female on the left. Female's got a much grayer head compared to the males. When in the breeding season, the males have that coloration, but other times it might just be dark. A trail camera picture of a young male. When you see something like this was snow in, I guess it was December, actually. It was a solid cover of snow. I was in an area where there was softwood and beech trees. And all of a sudden I come across this area that looks like somebody been up there with a rototiller. That's a clear sign almost all the time that it's going to be turkeys. They get in there and they rub with their feet, and they're looking for nuts and most anything that they can eat under there. And they'll rototiller up pretty big areas quite often. Whenever you see leaves that are roughed up compared to leaves that are flat, like that have been under snow or have been rained on and are flattened down, you know something caused those leaves to be roughed up. And to me, it's always worth going over and investigating and seeing what it might be. Something like this is pretty clearly turkey, but other times it's not nearly as much. It might be deer that paw. It might be raccoons that are digging in there for nuts and things too. Skunks, can be all kinds of stuff. But that jumps out at you pretty clearly with turkey. This is a walking turkey track in crusty, deeper snow. You can see the size of it. And quite often you don't see the real foot, clearly. They kind of crunch stuff in. I don't know why, but it looks sort of like a blob going there, but there's not much else around here that makes a track like that. So if you follow it a little bit, you'll pick up on it. You can see where it dragged its toe between the two tracks on both sides, both feet going forward. Of course, they walk just with 2 feet, so that's pretty clear. pretty interesting. I hadn't noticed it before, but you see these little pieces of hair right there. And it's kind of crinkly, that lower one. There was deer in this area also, and I suspect that's deer hair because there was other deer tracks right there. Here's where a turkey was walking, and then it flew. Either flew or landed. I don't think I could tell. There was a bunch of them around, but you can see the outer primaries there where they've dug into the snow. And that's my handprint there, extra large glove. So pretty good sized birds, these guys are. This is where a turkey did some droppings, and they're pretty damp. I'm not sure why, but real almost diarrhea-like looking. So I'm not sure what caused that this time of year. This was just a week or two ago. We were rabbit hunting, and it looked like they'd been feeding on burdock that was on the edge of this field. Seemed like that'd be kind of rough food to eat, but I guess they can manage it. This is just a comparison of a turkey foot on the top and a goose foot on the bottom. Fairly similar in size, but way different on their look. The turkey, the goose, that hind foot there or claw doesn't register very often, and turkey you'd rarely see that one either. It's there, but it's pretty indistinct. It's not. It's up the leg a little bit, but pretty big. That could be 3 inches long inside there, 3 to 4 inches. When you're out this time of year, sometimes you see a pile of feathers just right out in the open. You say, what the heck happened here? And lots of times there's not much for tracks or anything at all, but it's a pretty clear sign that a hawk or a falcon has killed another bird. And if you look the feathers over close, sometimes you can get an idea of what kind of bird it is. In a case where you've got no tracks on the snow, there's a good chance that they fed on a low branch right overhead. You might be able to see where that was. If there's tracks mixed in there, which in this case there was, but doesn't show very well, you might get a hint on how big a bird it was. But for around here, the odds are pretty good. It would be like a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk, depending on how big the bird was. Pretty sure I figured out this was a blue jay that had been killed. Could be the Merlin. We've got one that's around here in Ness and Johnson, which is one of the smaller falcons, or it could be a peregrine falcon also. Here's some more feathers. I think this was a dove, I figured out. The birds of prey will pick off a lot of the feathers before they feed on the meat, where other animals will eat everything down like an owl will. Around Karen, you'll get lots of birds. I don't know why I threw that picture in, but they find carcasses really fast. It's pretty amazing. Red-tailed hawks and ravens and all that. I don't know that I ever figured out what this bird was, but I really like the print that it left. It's almost like a double tail picture there. I don't have anything. I can't remember how big that was. I think it was fairly good size. Going through the woods and you see wood like this on the ground, or even bark where it's not in the other areas around you. Oh, something's going on with that tree. And quite often, you can look up and you might figure it out. Like in this case, pileated woodpecker has been chewing in there. And what they're after is carpenter ants most of the time. And they'll do a lot of work to get into the center of a dead log like that. And you can see all the chips down here where they've worked away at it. And it's surprising how fast they can do a big excavation like that. It'll take them a few days, but they work them up pretty quick. We won't see them this time of year, but in the spring when we get ice breakups, a great time to see muskrats. As soon as they can get out, muskrat and beaver actually, they'll come out looking for fresh food. This is over in Shelburne, and I got a picture of this little guy. But you can see where they live in the marshy areas because they have these push-ups and dens, and they look considerably different than beaver. They don't have wood in them, branches and things like that beaver do for a traditional beaver lodge. They use cattails and marsh grass and all that kind of thing. There's a bunch of them right now over off of Bridge Street on Lake Lamoille. You go to to where you cut into the road out of Hyde Park, and there's a bunch of them right there. It's a good way to get an idea how big a muskrat population you have. The more of these you have in the fall, the greater the density of muskrat. And this was my picture I took back in 1963 with my little box camera that I had on an album with all my other little pictures of scat and various things. And this is muskrat, and where it looks like an old telephone pole, where they climbed up and they deposit their little oblong droppings. They're about the size of grouse droppings, but darker. And that's exactly how they love to get out of the water and do things. And here's a nice view of up on our Gomo forest, Laraway Mountain up there to the left, and a beaver lodge in that second dam area there. One way to tell how whether a lodge or a dam is active with beaver still in it is the freshness of the sticks. They eat the cambium under the bark of a lot of different hardwood trees and aspen. And if it's really white and pretty fresh looking, there's beaver there. If it's getting all dry and dark, probably not, because that's what they're up to. This was one of the bigger beaver dams I've seen in a while in Vermont. It was up off the rail trail in Fletcher. Pretty big push up there. And here's where beaver got out. This was in Hyde Park too, I guess, and was working on a yellow birch tree. You can see where he pushed through the ground. Anything that chews away like that, darn well is a beaver. You see the big chips underneath here. This was a cedar tree, which is not a favorite tree to eat, but some reason they were chewing away at this. They'll cut some trees just for construction material, and then a lot of others they'll cut to eat the inner bark. You can also get an idea of whether there's beaver living in a lodge. A lot of times there'll be it'll be melded on the upper top of the lodge. Now that's from the water not freezing in the bottom of the lodge, but also from the body heat of the beaver will melt it out a little bit. It's not entirely reliable because sometimes you do have water that doesn't freeze underneath, even though there's no beaver there, and it still keeps it opened up a little bit, but it's a pretty good sign. Beaver dams are great places for other wildlife too. This is one up at one of the wildlife management areas in Danville. And there was this opening where the beaver were getting out, but there was otter sign and coyote sign. And of course there was rabbits all over the place. So it was just, and it had really been used, even though it was cold weather. So great places to read sign. And if you're a photographer, to hang out and see if you can get a picture. Right to the right of my lighter there is a beaver track in the snow. And then just below it at the bottom part of the picture, right in there, is the front foot of an otter. That was up in there too. So, there's some of the beaver sticks I was talking about, floating ones where they chewed on them in the bank or right on the edge of the water. You can see where the beaver and otter had both been going in the water right there too. This was December, I believe, so it wasn't frozen up too much. Yes.
Curious about why the other animals are there. Are they using the lodge? Are they eating? Are they being eaten?
Well, I think
attracted to it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think because this is more action going on there. The predators are ever hopeful they might be able to catch a beaver out that they would be willing to tackle. Other animals come to that open water. Any of you that are birders know that a good place to see birds in the winter is around open water. So yeah, I don't know. It just seems to attract them. Plus, frozen water is pretty easy to walk on. Quite often there's less snow on it. So like bobcat, particular, will use them as highways to go to travel. And if they'll just investigate anything that looks different like this, that has some good smells. Otter supposedly have been known to go into beaver lodges and kill young beaver. It seems like it'd be a pretty big critter for them to tackle. Most animals don't want to mess with them. Wolves regularly feed on beaver, but of course we don't have them here. But even they don't like to tackle a big 60-pound beaver. So yeah, not real sure, but they seems to be great places to look for them.
Thank you.
Thank you. And speaking of big critters, we've got a few of these guys still hanging in here around here in Vermont. These two moose, I took pictures last summer up on the east branch or west branch of the Penobscot River in Maine on a canoe trip we did up there. It was quite a population of them. But moose have a pretty big foot. The upper hoof there is from a white-tailed deer, and the lower is from a yearling moose. So a big adult moose would even have a bigger foot than that. And you can see the dew claws to the right there on the picture on both of these critters. And the dew claws on the front foot are a little closer to the hoof, and on the back foot, they're back even a little bit further. Normally you don't see those, but in deeper snow or in mud, they will register. So you'll be able to see those tracks. But quite often you're only going to see the lower part of the two front toes there on these guys. Moose, as I said, is a big foot. You can see a finger there. This is in new snow, early in I guess this was November snow. Here's where a big bull moose had been bedding that we jumped while we were scouting for moose. And you can see how big that is, bigger than a person for sure. Three of us could lay there and make that much sign. You can see the whips here have been browsed. Can't see them real clear, but they're definitely chewed up looking. Moose can really change their habitat, and deer can too, but moose really eat a lot of food in a day. Here's where a bull moose had scraped his antlers and had roughed up the bark on that hardwood whip. You can see it's real frayed looking. That comes when they're rubbing their antlers. This was up in the Algonquin Park. Quite often at the end of beaver dams, you'd see where the moose had just racked up in this case, it's a balsam fir, and they just beat it up so much it'll kill it. They've knocked all the bark off it, so it'll be dead the next year. There's another rub up in the Northeast Kingdom. I was seeing how hard you have to rub to knock that stuff off. This is a scrape. Moose make scrapes just like whitetail bucks do. They'll scrape away and then they'll urinate in it. They put some scent in, and it's the males, so they're trying to attract females during the rut. Here's a snowshoe track, and you can see those what almost looks like somebody peg legging through it, but that's moose tracks. And you can see it goes the length of that snowshoe track, and that's about a 3-foot snowshoe that we were using, and he punched right through it. And that's just the normal gait for a moose to walk. So lots of times at first look, you think that it's a person with kind of a short foot, but then you look at the stride between it and you say, whoa, that's got to be a 8-foot person to make a step like that. In deep snow, sometimes it's hard you don't really see the impression of the track. It's a little tough to tell which direction they're going. But the thing that I always look for is loose snow will be in the front of the track. Rarely will it be any loose in the back. A lot of times their foot scrapes to come in from the back, in this case, the lower part of the picture. And then when they pick their foot up, they drag some of that loose snow forward. And that's common for all tracks. Here's a running moose track. This was up in Eden, Albany area here a couple of weeks ago. And I guess we must have spooked them because they don't normally run, in case there's some good reason for it. And there you can see that loose snow on the front edge of the track, none on the back edge. So it's running away, even though it's hard to read that track. And let's see, this is what? This is moose 2. Okay, this was also where a moose jumped off the side of a snow machine trail. My Brittany up above there. Very good picture. Here's some old tracks, and these have been snowed in. That's my foot right there. And you can see these tracks, they look almost as big, but look at the size of that stride. I took a big step forward and then stepped back for the picture. So really long. The stride on these critters will be about equal to the body length from their hip to their shoulder. And with deer, coyotes, a lot of those critters, you can almost get an idea of the size of the animal by how long that step is between them. And here's a little mouse track to the right. I didn't see that when I took that picture. And that guy's coming towards us. More moose sign. This is where they've actually scraped bark off and have browsed. So they're eating this for food. So different than scraping it up. And I think I've got a picture. Yeah, this is browse also, where they've browsed it several years in a row, really chewed it up. You see that hobble bush to the right, how gnarly it looks. That's from years and years of browsing. If they do it enough, then there's a big population like we used to have in the Northeast Kingdom that'll kill those plants. Otherwise, they just kind of grow gnarly like that. Here's the lower incisors. The big one on the bottom is a moose, and this is deer on the top. And the thing with moose and deer, they don't have incisors on their top jaw, so only on their lower jaw, front teeth. So when they eat browse, they cut into it with their lower jaw, then they have to break it off, and they pull it off. So what that does is it makes for a real rough looking cut compared to the snowshoe hare. It's not a great picture of it. I think I've got a better picture somewhere. When you see hair on the snow, sometimes you're not sure what it is. But if you take the hair and pick it up and bend it as sharp as you can, and it takes a permanent bend like this, you know it's in the deer family, because deer have hollow hair. Makes it really warm, but it also makes it kind of crinkly, and it'll wear off fairly quickly. Other animals like dog and horses and anything else that might look similar is solid, and you won't be able to get it to crink like this. You can bend it, but it'll bounce right back. So I used to use that in my warden work when I'd find some hair on some poacher's leg. You know, I can pick it off and I can say, yep, deer or moose, whatever it might be. Deer is quite brown. Moose is usually pretty black. Depends where it comes off the body, but you can tell. And moose droppings, probably you've all seen those. Look sort of like milk duds. Again, don't taste quite so good, but about that size. The bigger the moose, the bigger the droppings. And of course, our deer, which we've got lots of, and pretty common around here. This happens to be a Missouri buck. They get a little bigger out there. Game camera picture, which I thought was kind of cool. That's a deer under the chin of a deer in the front there, I bet. Here's a buck scrape. This is up at your place, Doug. And it's older though. Of course, we're in the winter and it's dried up. So the odds are it was probably an October scrape of this year. You just sort of tell how much they've aged. If they really get really dry and aged, you know it was quite old. If they're really fresh, they usually do these before the rut starts. They're kind of marking their territories, maybe scraping velvet off because their antlers are a little itchy, but they all seem to do it. Here's a buck scrape, and they can be pretty big in comparison to the size of the animal. Interesting thing with buck scrapes is they almost always do it under an overhand hanging branch because they like to reach up and rub they've got a gland between their eyes, and they'll rub on that and leave some scent, and then they'll urinate and their over their tarsal glands into the scrape itself. Take that picture. You'll see where deer have dug down in the snow for food, and sometimes you wonder what the heck's going on here. Quite often you'll see little bits of fern or something like that. I guess they smell them under the snow and dig down through. And that can be confused with the deer bed. And the beds, of course, are where they've laid down. And in this case, laid down maybe before the little bit of snow we got a few nights ago, because I took this picture 2 days ago, I think. But quite often their body heat will melt the snow or melt what's under them, and it'll freeze up when they leave. So you'll have this sort of hard impression of their body. where if they were feeding, it would be scraped up, it would look quite different. Almost always you're going to see a deer track in that bed, even if you can't see it where it leads in and goes out. You know, you jump the deer out of the bed if it's a walking track into the bed and then a bounding track out. So they don't run for any reason either. Here's a bounding track coming out. I think it was out of that bed. Real clear there where that thrown snow is in the direction that it's traveling. So it's going up to the upper right corner there of that picture. Of course, deer tracks are, they're really common to see. I'm really paying attention here this last week trying to put this show together. And one thing that I really noticed was with the warm weather we just had, that some of these old tracks can really melt out in the ice, and they can almost be as big as a moose track. It's quite amazing how big those things can get. So you can get fooled by the size of tracks, and what kind of substrate they've been stepping on, how old they are. So don't let that throw you off, or go by the dimensions you read in the books, because they can be way off. And interesting on this one on the left, that's fox tracks right there. And I'll show you some clearer ones of them. This time of year, at least in the old days when we had a lot of snow, the deer would be traveling in big troughs, just easier to walk. So they'd be in these big trails, and it used to be kind of a measure of how hard the winter was on deer. They measure, biologists, a proportion of individual tracks outside these trails compared to the trails. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but it does give you an idea how much snow there's been. In this case, we didn't have that much snow, but especially under softwood in the deer yard areas, but they'll still stick to those kind of tracks. Here's side by side of a buck rub, and you can see how splintered up it is compared to a buck scrape, or not scrape, but a feeding, where it's stripping bark to eat the bark. And they dig in with those lower incisors, and then they pull up and they actually scrape the bark off and eat it. We used to think that was a sign the deer were starving when they would bark, but I think they get a lot of nutrient out of it, and they'll eat it even when there's plenty of other browse around to eat. And moose do the same thing. Here's some deer browse. And if you look here on the left edge of that little twig, you can see how kind of rough it is compared to that rabbit who would chew that off really smooth. And here's where they've dug in and then broke it. It's hard to tell moose browse from deer browse sometimes. So you sort of have to look where you are. If you're up in high ground, deep snow, the odds are it's not deer if it's fresh. Deer want to be down low. They want to be south facing, softwood areas, and moose will also take bigger browse twigs. They'll break them off. Deer much above matchstick size, they usually don't mess with, and where moose will take double or triple that size to break it off to eat it. And hair, again, especially this time of year you're going to see a lot of deer hair in trails, and you'll see moose hair too. Moose hair really stands out because it's so much longer and darker. And again, you can check to make sure that it actually is moose or deer by bending it and see if it crinks. I just threw this in because it's kind of a cool picture. Anybody tell what that is? What's going on there? Well, Doug knows that's a walleye that I'd filleted out down in the lower corner there, but that's a snapping turtle. This is up in the boundary waters that's feeding on the fish carcass. And here's one up by Green River Reservoir this spring. About mid-June, the females come out of the swamps and lakes and stuff, and they find gravelly areas like this, dig a big hole, and they'll lay their eggs in it, and they cover them up. That white round thing there, that's one of its eggs. They're kind of a leathery sort of a thing. And lots of predators love to eat snapping turtle eggs. So I don't have any nests that are successful, but I suspect a lot of them get preyed on. In the out in the Ottawa Valley there, we used to canoe a lot. I was seeing where wolves were essentially finding where the snappers had come out of the rivers, and were digging up their eggs and eating them left and right. Around here, it's coyotes, foxes, coons, skunks, I imagine too. Another critter we have around here you don't see very often, but is the bobcat. And this is one, again, just over the town line in Hyde Park, off of Battle Row. And a nice big, I assume, male with a game camera. And I'd hung up some old chicken carcasses, I guess, and wired them up, and these guys came to them. Bobcat, their track is pretty interesting. They will see on the coyotes that when you look at the track here on a bobcat, that negative space is almost forms a C, where with anything in the dog family, it'll be much more of an X. So quite different look. You get that look. This is a good clean track. A lot of times you don't get real clean tracks. Here's a coon track up here, back foot, and this is a cat track right here. You can confuse them with house cats, but house cat, this will be smaller. Bobcat are more the size, could be coyote size or fox size, but quite different looking. And they walk considerably different. This is a walking bobcat. That middle track has got a front foot and a back foot on it, overstep, and this sort of C look. And then the next one would be a C facing the opposite way, going there. They're not as common around here, so it's hard to get good at tracking bobcat. But if you get into a good manual, you can see the difference in those tracks, and they start to jump out at you pretty quickly. Another common guy that's hibernated now, but when you get these warm spells, they come out. These tracks I just took a week ago, I think, and the coon tracks, back foot is considerably different than the front. Front foot looks like a person's hand almost, and the back foot a lot more like a human foot except with toes. They have this interesting way they walk. They're a little pigeon-toed, and quite often that front foot and the rear foot will be right next to each other. They won't really be offset very much. This one's slightly offset, but sometimes they're really directly over. And when you see that side-by-side track like that, you can almost be positive it's going to be a raccoon. And there it shows it pretty clear, at least with the middle ones. So that's a front foot to the left, rear foot to the right, and then an overstep with a rear and a front there. Coyote, another one we'll see a lot of their tracks. This is a western coyote out in Yellowstone Park. Here's one of our guys. Ours tend to be a little redder or yellower coloration than western coyotes. And they have that typical dog looking foot compared to the bobcat, which is more round or almost wider. Coyotes will be a little bit more like a rectangle, a little longer. Back foot is smaller than the front foot. And you can see here he's going away from us. Found this the other day rabbit hunting. I was coming along and I was seeing coyote tracks. And then I got more and more coyote tracks. I said, something's going on. All of a sudden I came here, and this is a site of where they killed a deer. This is all that's left pretty much of the deer. I found the jawbone a little distance away and more hair. But coyotes will pretty much eat everything up. And I'm sure if I went back there this week, probably all those rib bones will be gone, and maybe some of even the vertebrae. Sometimes all I found was teeth where they killed deer. They don't waste any of it, but this was just covered with tracks here. Here's some droppings that was right near there. When they've been feeding on meat, they won't have much substance to it. It'll be real black and pretty gelatinous. Lots of critters that'll happen with. Can really vary in size. A lot of time coyote track or scat you'll find in trails. They like to put them up in little higher spots, and you'll see a lot of hair in it. Can't tell. I don't think that's deer hair. It might be rabbit. But a lot of times it'll be deer hair because they kill them and they feed on dead ones, and that's a major food source for them. And when they dry up, they get white looking like this. That's an older scat. Here's a close-up of one. And you can actually melt them down in some water and pick through, and you can see little bones, and you can figure out a lot what they've been eating. Nowadays, the biologists used to do a lot of that scat analysis. Now they can use DNA, and they can really tell you everything that animal is eating. And they
Wow.
can use DNA from the coyote, and they can tell which coyote it is. They're really pretty amazing. Yeah.
Wow. Do coyotes hunt in packs or individually?
No, they're interesting. They more or less hunt in family groups. So it depends on the time of year. Midsummer through early winter, quite often it'll be the family group. And then it kind of pairs down once you get to the breeding season around now. It'll be more or less the alpha pair and one of their young from the year before, from that summer. So it'll be more or less 3. So rarely do you get big numbers of them together. If there's a really good food source, you may see more than that together. But it seems to be they stay in these smaller groups.
So what
Yeah.
you know is probably likely the 3 of them, the alpha.
Yeah,
pair.
that's 3, or if it's with the young of the year, depending on how many they've had, you could have a bigger number. You could have 5, 6 together, but it would be only 2 adults generally. Yeah, they're not quite like wolves on that. Although our eastern coyotes act a little bit more like a brush wolf than the western coyotes do. So I don't know, nothing is for sure, but that's general. Here's another coyote scat, but this is interesting. It's got urine right around it. And because the urine's so close to where it defecated, you're pretty positive that's a female. And because this is real recent picture too, that they're in the breeding season right now. So it's probably some marking to let males know that I'm getting receptive, and look me up, buddy. The coyote. I think I've got something tied up in that tree that he's looking at. Spring of the year is a great time to look for sign and see what's going on in your area, because the snow goes off and all of a sudden a lot of things show up. This is down behind the town shed, or the state shed in Jeffersonville along the Lamoille River. And I found about 4 spots where wild turkeys have been killed in the winter. Because it was open country along the river, it could have been bobcat, or it could have been coyote. I couldn't really tell. There was coyote scat, but maybe they just came and fed on the carcass. But bobcats are really good turkey hunters. And it's one reason we think we've got more coyote or bobcat now than we used to, because we've got more turkey. When I first got up in this country in 1970, we didn't have turkeys up here, and our bobcat population had been dropping for a while, but now that's rebounded in the last 10 years by a lot. And you'll find winter kill or coyote kill deer. It's always hard to tell. This is one that's been definitely chewed up by coyotes. If you find a bobcat kill of a deer, and they will kill them, they almost always cover them up with snow or leaves or hair, where coyotes never do that. A bear can do that too, but that's pretty clear when a bear does it. And the smallest member of the dog family we have around here, red fox, real distinctive with that big bushy tail. They have quite a petite track. They're a pretty light animal. And the width of that track is really narrow. When they're walking slow, it'll be a little wider. And when they're striding and going a little faster, it'll be almost in a direct line. And if you see that direct line kind of a track, you've got a fox, not a coyote or a dog or something else like that. They're the only ones. They have a real narrow chest, and that's a real distinct look for them. Track is, again, the typical canine looking track. Well, they've got a fair amount of hair in them. And here's one walking along, and I didn't think of it at the time when I was looking at it, but you see those drag marks? And foxes are usually pretty dainty walkers. They don't drag their feet, they pick them up. I think this fox was carrying something in his mouth that was hanging down and was dragging, that had a squirrel, or it had something in its mouth that was going along. But again, you can see the narrow track. It's got a little zigzag to it, but coyote would be even wider than that. Most dogs are considerably wider than that. But dogs and coyotes are kind of hard to tell apart. Usually you can figure it out. Here's one that's doing a trot, just sort of loping along, I guess. Fox. And there you can see a close up of that same track. And they have that typical kind of with the negative space, you can almost draw an X in between their toes that you won't be able to do with most other besides dog family. This is an interesting one. This one came from Sophie Malowitz, I think her last name is. She's a conservation director for the Cold Hollow to Canada crew, and a real good outdoor naturalist, and she does tracking seminars. And this was one that I saw in a seminar she did just a month ago. And this is red fox and gray fox, kind of an overstep. So this track up here is the gray fox, pretty round, and it'll look really cat-like, except it's got a really small heel pad. And here's the red fox, bit bigger. It's not quite as hairy looking. It's got a bigger pad, but you can see the claw marks, so you know it's not a bobcat or something. And gray fox retract their claws. They can climb trees, so you don't see their claws nearly so often. Same with bobcats, you won't see their claws very often, unless it's slippery or some reason they put them down. So gray fox are interesting. They're a woods fox, where the red fox tends to be out more in the open. And wolf, which we don't really have here. This is a Yellowstone wolf, but I threw a few pictures in just for fun. And you've got that typical dog track, pretty big, bigger than most of our dogs. And, you know, wolves, they'll travel long distances. And here's a wolf track coming right directly at us. And that's a caribou track going the opposite way. This was this is in sand up near Ngaba Bay in northern Quebec on a canoe trip up there. We actually saw that wolf loping along. Pretty cool to see. Otter, this is Doug's favorite. This is one up near Green River Reservoir. And when you see these kind of loping tracks, and then you see where an animal looks like it slid along on its belly, you know darn well you've got an otter. And the width of this is about 4 to 6 inches, 5 inches, something like that. So fairly wide, about as wide as a little wider than your hand. And they'll do this going downhill. They'll even slide a little bit uphill, but on the flat, this was on Green River Reservoir. And he would just kind of run along, get a little speed up, just like a kid with a sled, and then flop down and slide right along. And they've got short legs, so when they lope, like you can see where he dug into the little bit deeper snow. This was another day, and slid a little, not too much, and then got a good slide right there. Really cool to see. I was ice fishing on the reservoir, and I saw this fresh track, and it had just snowed, so I knew it was really hot. And I was digging my holes, and I happened to look down the southern part of the lake, and there I see that otter loping across the ice. That's cool. Here's this was up near that one beaver dam that I told you about in Fletcher. This was above a culvert going under the rail trail. And this is where the otter were coming in and out of the water there. Otter droppings, they can be really dark like this and wet. Along Lake Lamoille, there are several places they have toilets. They seem to like to use the same place to defecate, especially in open water. And it's kind of interesting to look through. It can be a little smelly, but you'll see fish scales, and you'll see bones and pieces of frog and all kinds of stuff that they've been eating. This time of year, you'll see them away from water. They'll travel overland to get to different places. So they're not always on a waterway, but quite often that's where you're going to find them. Here's our other big weasel, almost as big as an otter, not quite as heavy, but this is a fisher. So it was up in a tree. They will climb. They're not as good climbers as marten, but they'll definitely go up. And here's, that doesn't show real great, but this is on crusty snow. And you can see the hind foot's considerably bigger than the front foot. But most of the time, you're going to see where they bound. And this track had me fooled for a little bit. I came to this and I said, what the heck is this? It was an old track, so I couldn't see any imprints in it. It was close together. So it makes you think short legs, not a fairly long body, but short legs. So I started to follow it, which is what I recommend doing in tracking. Don't just look at the one track at your feet and then say, oh, I don't know what that is, or maybe it's this. Follow the thing. It's always fun to see what they're up to. But this guy, I started to follow him. Then I came to the characteristic lope of a weasel family. And because of the size of it and the distance between it, I'm saying to myself, the odds are really good as Fisher. But I still wasn't 100% because it was pretty indistinct track. So I followed a little further and I came to this. There was a blowdown right on the top of the screen of this. And this is where the animal actually buried under the snow. So then I could eliminate fox. I could eliminate bobcat. They won't do that kind of thing. This is a weasel thing. And because of the size of that hole and the size of those lopes, it had to be Fisher. I don't have Fisher come through my backyard all that often, but often enough to see them. So that's definitely what that was. And here is I actually kept following it, and I got on the stream, and there was shallower snow, and I could see the 5 toes. You can count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They don't always register, but with the weasel family, almost always they do register. So when you have 5 toes that are pretty clear, and you have any of that bounding look, you know you've got something in the weasel family. So it's just a matter of what size are we dealing with here. Here's a mink that it's the first and only time I've ever seen a mink up a tree. This is going down to Journey's End, actually, before we had it as town property when I was doing some scouting down there. But they will climb trees, but you're mostly associated with going along the water. And this is one I'd hung an old chicken that had died. And this mink was coming out feeding on it. And he had a little hole down here, and there was a brook right near there. And it can, a big male mink can fool you for a female fisher. They're almost the same size, but they're smaller and just narrower and really associated with waterways. Here's sort of the typical track jumping along. Now this, you can see my glove there, but it's pretty small. So when I look at this, I'd say, the odds are pretty good this is ermine or weasel, and probably not mink, but there can be overlap because the males are in both of those, all the weasel family are considerably bigger than the females. Then I came to this and I said, what the heck is this? It looked almost like otter, but it wasn't nearly as wide. And when I kept going with it, then I came to the characteristic, double jump of an ermine. So it was no question that's what it was. For some reason, it plowed along there on the ice to get where it was going. Ermine are really small. They can go in mouse holes, so it gives you an idea. They're just long and thin, and mice are what they eat. Now this guy, we've got a few of in Vermont, but not common, and none right in Lamoille County that I know of. But this is the American marten. And we've got just got some land actually conserved up in Danville where they have documented marten. And marten tracks look a lot like mink, except they're really busy. When you follow them, they go all over the place. It's like they're just frantic, looking for food or looking for something. This one happened to be a fairly straight track. But most mink to me are traveling. They're going somewhere. They'll investigate nooks and crannies, but these marten are just all over the countryside. And this one that we got this picture of, this one came into our tent. We were winter camping in the Algonquin Park and was rustling around in our food right in the tent. We had to kind of throw firewood at it to get it out of the darn tent. And it was the same campsite that most every year we use, not recently, but this marten would show up. Can't be the same marten, but seemed to be. And there's that double track characteristic of weasel family. This is one we won't see here. You've got to be way up north, and this happened to be in Norway. Ingrid took this picture, and this is the wolverine. And you can see how big that foot is. And this is the biggest member of the weasel family. And again, 5 toes, asymmetrical look to it, and going from left to right. And you can see the size of that glove, medium-sized glove. That's a big foot. So we don't have them. They're more northern or western or northern European. So that's the pictures I got, and these are some of the books that I recommend. This one, actually, I don't have a copy of this anymore. I lent it to somebody and never got it back. But this is a really good kind of a philosophical book on tracking, which I really like. And that's where that art of seeing came to mind, Paul Redenzi. And he lives in Massachusetts. So a lot of his pictures are Northeast pictures that he has in his. Another one, this is by Lynn Levine. She's a forester down Rutland Way, I believe. And she made this little pocket guide, which is pretty cool. It's got full-size pictures. They're not as accurate as a lot, but they were, it really looks at a lot of the different track patterns that I like. A good one. This is a really good book. It's got all kinds of sign and tracks, and you can see how big this thing is. It's a great big thick book. But this is a really good book that I like. It gives really good prints, all kinds of animals. And this one's really nice because he's an educator. The guy that wrote this been studying tracks and track trails for a long time, and really good on how to visualize tracks and how to get into the animal skin and think like the animal. Really good naturalist. So that's one that I really like too. And I think that's it. Oh, that was, I guess I forgot to put this one in the right order. If you look up that beech tree, you see a bunch of broken branches up top. And that's where a bear had climbed up there and broke those branches off to get the beech nuts. I watched one year do that. It was pretty impressive. They are a strong animal, I'll tell you. He reached up there and just cracked those green beech branches right down that would break your knee trying to break it yourself. But anyway, that's it. So I'd be glad to take any questions or any comments.
If the library were to get a book or two on tracking, you gave us this wonderful list. Could you send me maybe your 2 favorite or something? And we could talk to Jean and see if we could get them.
Yeah, I expect you have some down there. I haven't looked lately to see what you've got, but probably. Yeah, glad to do that. Yep. The other thing I can do too is I mentioned this Sophie from the naturalist there with the Canada, the cold hollow to Canada, and her presentation that she did is also online available, and I have the link, so I could send that to you. And they did a really good job on that. I think people, if you like this, you'd enjoy that too. But I'll send that to you, Dorgan, and you can put it out to folks. Okay, good. Okay.
Question. Just
Yes.
regarding, I just recently came across a red fox during the day. My first reaction was they're not supposed to be out during the day. Is that indeed true?
Not necessarily. They're in their breeding season too, so they're more active. And as we get later in the winter, they get hungrier and hungrier. You know, especially the females. They got embryos going, so they get bolder and bolder. So that's not too bad a sign. Now, you know, if they didn't run from you when they see you and stuff, then you got to worry a little bit. You can look at their hair too. They get mange, which can really weaken them, but doesn't necessarily kill them. I mean, there's lots of diseases wild animals get. So any wild animal that's not wary of you, you should keep your distance. For sure. But no, I'd say if it looks, fairly healthy, they've got really thick hair right now, so it's hard to tell how skinny they are or not. But no, that would be fairly normal. And that's nice to be able to see. Yeah. And they are a little more nocturnal or diurnal than a lot of our critters we have around here.
Good to know. Thank you.
Welcome. Doug, did you have something?
Oh, I just want to say it was wonderfully informational. Well
Okay,
done. Thank you.
probably overwhelmed you. It's funny, you get digging into this stuff and it just kind of keeps on going down a rabbit hole somewhere, but yeah, good. Well, the fun part to me is, you just get out there and you just look at it like being a detective. You get a little hint of this, a little hint of that, and you put it together. And I don't worry so much about, saying for sure that this is, say, a fisher versus a big male mink. It'd be nice to know, but I say, okay, I've got a nice weasel family critter going here. And it could be either one of these two. And then, that's good enough. And following them just to see what they do is going to be a lot of fun. I remember one year, the first fisher actually track that I came across on the Worcester Woods when I got here. We didn't have many fisher a long time ago. I came across a track and I'd heard that in deep snow, a good man on snowshoes could actually run one to get it to go up a tree. So I thought, I'm just going to follow this fisher. So I followed it, I don't know, a couple of miles, and I see where the track disappears. And it was right at the base of a softwood tree, and I see bark. I said, well, that's what? I didn't really thought about him climbing trees. So I backed off and looked, and sure enough, here's a fisher up right on one of those witch's brooms that you get in spruce trees, looking at me. So I said, wow, that's cool. And I had a camera, so I took off my snowshoes and I climbed up a tree next to it to try to get a picture, and didn't actually end up with a good picture. And then it ran down the tree and took off. And so I put my snowshoes on to see if I could actually tree it. Well, after about a mile of running on snowshoes, it was still going strong and I was shot. So I gave up on that. So I think that was an old wives' tale. I'm not sure. Either that or somebody was a lot stronger than me. Yeah. Anything else? Anybody have in mind?
I'm going to turn the camera on just for a second.
There we go. Oh,
Oh,
get some
hi,
good heat
yeah.
there.
yeah, you too. You too. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Very informative. Learned a lot.
Good. Good.
Appreciate it very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, I'd say, it's like anything, the more you look and the more you practice, the better you get. I find taking pictures helps. If I could sketch, that would be the best way to learn tracks, I think, because then you really got to know what you're looking at. And there's just the subtle things can make the difference on identification and where they're going and what they're doing. But the more you do it, it's like a never ending thing, which is what I love about nature. Endless variety.
Yep.
Yeah, good.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you very much. That was fun. And
Yeah.
like I said, I got my slides organized finally, relatively.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Eric.
This was
Okay,
just
you're welcome.
wonderful.
Good seeing you, Lois.
Yeah. So send me your contact information if you want to go on the walk next week.
Yeah. And if other folks want to come, that's fine. We'll have room. We can make it work. And tentatively where we're going to go is where we've gone before, Lois, up there by Dibden, where the mailboxes are on the college, and go up towards the water tower. So, but you'll hear from Dorgan, but glad to have anybody come along. It looks like long distance weather, looks like we might have some good tracking snow, but we'll see. We'll make something happen probably. So unless it's below 0 and windy, we'll probably give it a shot. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dorgan.